He asked for a divorce and demanded she terminate the pregnancy. Believing the problem was resolved, he moved on with his life. 8 months later, he sees her pregnant and freezes upon learning the truth. Chloe always knew that silence carried many voices. As a literature professor, she taught her students to listen to the unspoken words hidden between the lines of great novels, to feel the weight of a pause, the depth of an empty gaze. Little did she know that her own life would become the most challenging book to decipher, a story where her husband, the protagonist, was a blank page. Samuel, a successful engineer, navigated life with the precision of a mathematical equation. To him, the world was a series of problems to solve, structures to build. Emotions were unnecessary variables, complications that derailed the main objective. His marriage to Chloe, in his mind, was just another project completed, a social formality checked off the list. He was physically present, but his soul resided in an inaccessible place, a cold, locked office on the top floor of his being. Their marriage was born under the sign of emptiness. It was more the will of their parents than his own desire. He had been with Chloe for some time, so it seemed logical to make it official. The ceremony was elegant, the guests smiled, and the kiss at the altar was merely a brush of lips, devoid of warmth or promise. The house they shared in Seattle was impeccably decorated but as cold as a museum. Chloe tried to fill it with life. She bought fresh flowers that wilted unnoticed by him. She cooked his favorite meals, which he ate distractedly, his eyes glued to his phone or lost in thoughts of projects and deadlines. She tried to start conversations about their day, their dreams, anything to build a bridge between them. His responses were curt, efficient, shutting down any chance of connection. Small gestures of affection, which for Chloe were like seeds of intimacy, fell on barren soil. A touch on his arm while he worked at his computer made him stiffen. A heartfelt note tucked into his briefcase was found days later, crumpled and forgotten in a pocket. She remembered one night in particular, a few months after their wedding. It was the only time they laughed together and made love with genuine passion. Other times it felt like fulfilling an obligation, a task expected of a married couple when he sought her out. One rainy evening in Seattle, she brewed tea and sat beside him on the couch, hoping to recreate that special night. She rested her head on his shoulder, a silent invitation for an embrace. Instead, he stood abruptly. "I need to finish a report," he said, his voice flat, and retreated to his office, leaving her alone with the patter of rain and the steam rising from her cooling tea, mirroring the chill in her heart. Each rejection was a small death, another brick in the wall he built between them. Chloe, however, was not a woman of outbursts. Her strength lay in her quiet resilience, her ability to absorb pain without breaking. She studied Samuel with the same care she gave to a complex character in a novel, trying to unravel his motivations, the source of his icy distance. But unlike a book, there was no narrator to reveal his secrets. There was only his silence, a silence that screamed abandonment. The end didn't come with a bang, but with the same coldness that had defined the beginning. It was a dreary Tuesday, the sky as grey as the mood in their home. Samuel came home from work, set his briefcase on the dining table, and without even removing his coat, looked at her. There was no anger, no sadness, not even hesitation in his eyes, just the same terrible neutrality. "I want a divorce," he said. The words hung in the air, precise and cutting like a scalpel. "I'll never love you the way you deserve." The statement didn't surprise her. In a way, it confirmed what she had felt in every corner of their home, every lonely night. His brutal honesty, however, was a punch to the gut, stealing the breath she didn't realize she was holding. She expected an excuse, a justification, perhaps the mention of someone else. But no, just the raw, unadorned truth, delivered with the same lack of emotion as cancelling a meeting. Chloe didn't scream. She didn't cry in front of him. There were no pleas or accusations. She met his gaze for a long moment, seeing not the man she married, but a stranger who had shared her roof. In her silence, she found a dignity he could never take from her. She nodded, a nearly imperceptible movement. Her acceptance seemed to unsettle him briefly, as if he expected a scene, a drama to validate his decision. But Chloe wouldn't give him that comfort. She stood and went to their bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The chapter was closed. In the days that followed, the silence in the house grew denser, heavy with the impending end. They moved like ghosts, avoiding each other's eyes. The divorce process was swift, efficient, exactly as Samuel preferred. No disputes, no complications. Chloe asked for nothing beyond what was rightfully hers, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. It was amid this fog of farewell, while packing her books and memories, that a new and unexpected reality emerged. A persistent fatigue she attributed to emotional stress, a slight dizziness in the mornings, a strange intuition growing within her. With her heart pounding with a mix of fear and a spark she dared not name, she bought a pregnancy test. In the solitude of the bathroom, with the divorce papers nearly signed on the dining table, she saw two clear, unmistakable lines. Pregnant. A new life was sprouting from the barren soil of her marriage, a life that was half hers and half the man who had just told her he could never love her truly. In that moment, staring at the small plastic stick, Chloe felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The silence around her broke with a sound she didn't recognize, a fragile laugh mixed with a single tear rolling down her cheek. The story, she realized, was far from over. It was merely the end of the first chapter. Her hand trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of the revelation. The pregnancy test on the bathroom sink seemed like an artifact from another world, rewriting her past and blurring her future. For a moment, the world shrank to that small plastic object and the two lines that sealed her fate. She leaned against the cold wall, her heart hammering, a symphony of panic and a fierce protective tenderness. There was a life inside her, a spark of light in the darkness of her failed marriage. But that spark also belonged to Samuel, the man who had discarded her like yesterday's newspaper. Deciding to tell him was not easy. She spent a sleepless night, her mind a whirlwind. Part of her, wounded and proud, wanted to vanish, to take her secret, and build a life far from his shadow. But another part, rooted in responsibility and order, knew he had a right to know. Perhaps, just perhaps, the news of a child could awaken something in him, a flicker of humanity she had never found. It was a foolish, fragile hope, but it refused to die completely. The next morning, with deep circles under her eyes and a resolve forged in insomnia, she confronted him. He was in the dining room, reviewing the final divorce papers with his lawyer on the phone, his voice calm and decisive. Chloe waited until he hung up, the pregnancy test hidden in her hand, now warm from her nervous grip. "Samuel, we need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up, impatience barely masked. "Chloe, I thought we'd settled everything. The lawyers are handling the details." "This isn't about the lawyers." She took a deep breath and placed the test on the table, among the divorce documents. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was unlike any they had shared before. It wasn't empty or indifferent. It was heavy, dense, charged with shock and a coldness that seemed to chill the room. Samuel stared at the test, then at her face, and for the first time Chloe saw a clear emotion in his eyes. Repulsion. It wasn't the reaction her foolish hope had imagined. There was no confusion, no joy, not even anger, just the look of someone facing a critical error, a miscalculation threatening his perfectly laid plans. His response came not as a suggestion, but as an order. "You'll get rid of it." The words were delivered with the same authority he used with his engineers on a job site. "I don't want to be a father. This isn't happening." He stood, pacing the room, his mind already working on the logistics of that solution. "This is a mistake, an accident. It has nothing to do with me or my plans. We're getting divorced. Take care of it." Each word was a blow. Take care of it. As if the life growing inside her was a plumbing leak, a flaw in a blueprint. In that moment, Chloe's last fragile hope shattered. The man before her wasn't just emotionally distant. He was a desert, incapable of nurturing any life that didn't fit his designs. The pain was sharp but brief. In its place, a cold fury, a steely determination, was born. She would no longer bend to his will. She would not sacrifice her child on the altar of his convenience. "Fine, Samuel," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, picking up the test from the table. "I'll take care of it." He stopped pacing, relieved. Good. Schedule the clinic. I'll cover everything, of course. Just tell me the day and time. I'll go with you to make sure it's done right. His distrust, his need to make sure, was the final insult. He didn't trust her even to carry out his order to destroy her own child, and it was there in that humiliation that Chloe's plan was born. A plan of escape, of liberation, a deception to buy her peace and protect the life she carried. I scheduled it for Friday, 10 in the morning, she told him 2 days later, her eyes blank, her tone flat. Friday dawned grey and damp, a mirror of her supposed mood. Chloe woke long before sunrise. There were no packed suitcases, as she had sent her boxes of books and belongings to a storage unit weeks earlier, under the guise of organizing the move. There was only a small handbag with essentials, her wallet, some documents, and the ultrasound she had secretly gotten the day before, the tiny, pulsing blip on a black screen, now the center of her universe. She looked in the mirror. She was an actress about to take the stage for the most challenging role of her life. She practiced a look of exhaustion, the vacant stare of someone carrying a burden. At 8:30, well before the agreed time, she took a cab to the street where the clinic was located. She didn't go inside. She walked on the opposite sidewalk, watching the building's entrance with growing anxiety. At precisely 10 o'clock, Samuel's car pulled up. He got out, his face a mask of controlled impatience, and entered the building. Chloe waited, counting the minutes that dragged like hours. She imagined him at the reception, asking for her, his irritation growing with each second of waiting. Exactly 15 minutes later, she crossed the street and entered the building, finding him near the elevators, his face tight with anger. "Where were you? I said 10, he hissed. Chloe met his gaze, letting the silence stretch before delivering her final line. She lifted her chin, her eyes as cold as his had always been. "It's done. I got here early. I didn't want your company." She brushed past him toward the exit, as if he were an irrelevant obstacle. He followed, stunned. "What do you mean it's done? You—" She stopped at the revolving door, turning to him one last time. The pale morning light illuminated her face, and for a second he seemed to see a strength he had never noticed. "You don't need to worry about it anymore, Samuel," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It's taken care of. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a life to restart." With that, she pushed through the door and stepped onto the street, not looking back. She didn't see him stand there, frozen, a mix of relief and an unease he couldn't name. She just walked, each step taking her further from that life, that man, that coldness. She hailed the first cab she saw, gave the address of the bus station, and as the car pulled away, she allowed herself to cry. They were tears not of sorrow but of liberation. At the bus station, she bought a one-way ticket to a destination she hadn't shared with anyone. She turned off her phone, removed the SIM card, and tossed it into the first trash can she found. As the bus left Seattle's skyline behind, Chloe placed a hand on her still flat stomach. It was a silent pact between her and her child. They were alone, but they were together. She was vanishing from Samuel's world, so their world could be born. The clinic ruse wasn't just a lie, it was her declaration of independence, the final irrevocable act of a woman who chose life, even if it meant walking an unknown, solitary road. The bus cut through the landscape, leaving behind Seattle's concrete and steel and plunging into the deep green of rural Washington. For Chloe, each mile was like turning a page, moving away from the painful prologue of her new life. Her destination wasn't exotic or unfamiliar, but a return to her roots, a refuge she held in the back of her mind, her grandmother Margaret's house in a small town called Ellensburg. It was a place where time moved slower, governed by the sun and rain, where silence wasn't empty, but filled with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. Margaret welcomed her at the door of her small, whitewashed house, its porch lined with ferns and the scent of cornbread wafting from the kitchen. She asked no questions Chloe wasn't ready to answer. Her eyes, creased by decades of smiles and some sorrows, saw everything, the veiled pain, the barely noticeable belly, the fierce determination hardening her granddaughter's gaze. With a hug that smelled of lavender and damp earth, she simply said, "Your room's just how you left it. Rest, my dear. Tomorrow's a new day. That unquestioning embrace was the balm Chloe's wounded soul needed. Here she wasn't the ex-wife of a successful engineer or the woman who fled. She was just Chloe, Margaret's granddaughter. Life became simple, almost monastic. Days were marked by quiet rituals, waking to the rooster's crow, helping her grandmother in the garden, reading on the porch swing, feeling the afternoon sun warm her skin. That slow, organic rhythm was the perfect counterpoint to the mechanical, timed life she'd led with Samuel. For the first time in years, she felt she belonged somewhere. The secret of her pregnancy, however, was a weight she carried in silence. It was her treasure and her burden. In the early weeks, fear was a constant companion. Fear that Samuel might somehow find her. Fear she couldn't raise a child alone. Fear of judgment in a small town where everyone knew each other. But her love for the life growing inside her was stronger than any fear. She spent hours with her hand on her belly, whispering to her baby, promising a world of peace far from its father's coldness. Prenatal visits were done at the town's small health clinic. The doctor, a kind, reserved woman, treated her with professional respect that comforted her. Chloe crafted a simple, plausible story. She was a widow, having come from Seattle to be near family after her husband's death. The lie stung, but it was a necessary shield to protect herself and her child. No one needed to know the humiliating truth of her story. The need to support herself brought her back to her passion. With the help of the local pastor, who had known her grandmother for years, she landed a job as a substitute teacher at the rural school. It was a simple wooden building with 3 classrooms, but to Chloe it was a sanctuary. Teaching those children, their hands calloused from farm work and their eyes bright with genuine curiosity, rekindled her calling. She didn't just teach English and literature. She taught about dreams, the power of words, the possibility of seeing beyond the barbed wire fences of their small plots. In return, the children gave her the normalcy and purpose she desperately needed. It was there she met Hannah, a neighbor whose property bordered Margaret's. Hannah was Chloe's opposite. While Chloe was introspective and observant, Hannah was pragmatic, talkative, and firmly rooted in the earth. A strong woman, she managed her farm and children with boundless energy. At first, Chloe kept her usual distance, but Hannah's warm, no-nonsense nature gradually broke through her defenses. Hannah would show up unannounced, bringing a basket of fresh eggs, a wedge of cheese, or just a desire for a chat. She noticed Chloe's pregnancy before her belly became obvious, not with a gossipy glance, but with the practical wisdom of someone who had been there. "Her child's a blessing, no matter how they come into the world," she said one day over coffee on the porch, offering Chloe an acceptance she hadn't expected to find. Hannah became her anchor, her connection to the practical world. She took Chloe to buy her first maternity clothes, shared tips for morning sickness, and listened patiently when the loneliness of the night brought insecurities to the surface. Chloe never shared the full story about Samuel, and Hannah never pressed. She understood unspoken pain and respected her friend's silence. The support of Hannah and Margaret's unconditional love formed an invisible safety net around Chloe and her baby. As her belly grew, round and visible, Chloe transformed. The fragile, silent woman who had accepted the end of her marriage gave way to a lioness, protective of her cub. She carried the weight of her pregnancy alone, the sleepless nights, the back pain, the looming anxiety of childbirth, but also the hope. Each kick from her baby was a reminder she had made the right choice. It was proof that, even born from pain and rejection, love could bloom in the most unexpected places. In that simple life in Ellensburg, hidden from the world that had hurt her, Chloe was finally building a home. A real home made not of cold walls and designer objects, but of affection, earth, and the promise of a future entirely her own. While Chloe found peace in the rhythm of the land, Samuel's life unraveled in the sterile silence of his luxury apartment in Seattle. The relief he felt at the clinic door was fleeting, a thin layer of ice over an abyss he didn't know existed. In the first days, he clung to his routine with a soldier's discipline. He buried himself in work, diving into projects, filling every minute with meetings and spreadsheets, building a fortress of busyness to keep thoughts at bay. But the night, relentless, always came. And with the night came the nightmares. They weren't dreams of monsters or chases. They were subtler and thus more terrifying. He saw himself in a white, sterile hospital room, the smell of antiseptic in the air. Chloe was lying in a bed, pale but not looking at him. She stared at a blank spot on the ceiling. There was no sound, just an oppressive silence, the same silence he had cultivated, now suffocating him. He tried to speak, to ask, but his voice wouldn't come. Then he felt an overwhelming loss, a sense that something infinitely precious had been torn from him, leaving a hole in his chest. He woke, drenched in sweat, heart racing, breath ragged, the echo of that emptiness reverberating in his soul. At first he dismissed the dreams as a side effect of divorce stress, an anomaly to ignore. But they persisted, night after night, growing more vivid. The image of Chloe's cold face at the clinic door saying, "It's taken care of," replayed in his mind during the day. Her coldness, a mirror of his own, now haunted him. He, who had always prided himself on emotional control, felt adrift in a sea of unnameable, uncalculable feelings. Seeking a cure, a return to the normalcy he knew, Samuel did what he always did with a problem. He sought a logical, external solution. He decided he needed to fill the void left by Chloe. The name that came to mind was Emily, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he had loved but who left him for someone else, prompting his hasty marriage to Chloe. In his engineer's logic, it was a simple equation. If his marriage to Chloe was a mistake, perhaps the answer lay in the past with the woman he thought he'd loved. He tracked her down, got her number, and invited her for coffee, hoping to rekindle the spark. Emily agreed, more out of curiosity than interest. They sat in a sleek Seattle cafe, and Samuel tried to be the charming man he once was. But his words felt hollow, rehearsed. He spoke of his success, his projects, but Emily looked at him with distant compassion. "I heard about your divorce, Samuel. I'm sorry," she said politely. "It was for the best. It never worked," he replied too quickly. "You know, Emily, I've been thinking about us. I think I made a mistake. When I saw you with someone else, I wanted to get back at you, so I rushed into marrying Chloe, who always cared for me." Emily smiled, a sad smile. She raised her left hand, where an engagement ring gleamed under the cafe's lights. "You didn't make a mistake, Samuel. You made a choice, and so did I. I'm engaged, getting married in 2 months." She looked at him with disarming sincerity. "I loved you, truly. But the man I loved isn't the one sitting in front of me. You've become cold, distant. The same man your wife divorced, I imagine." She leaned in slightly. "You know, I met Chloe a few times at events. She always looked at you with so much love in her eyes, a love you apparently never saw. I hope one day you realize what you lost." Those words, spoken without malice, were more devastating than any rejection. "I hope one day you realize what you lost." The phrase echoed in his mind, overlaying the nightmare images. He returned to his empty apartment, and for the first time the solitude wasn't peace but punishment. He looked around at the expensive furniture, the panoramic city view, and realized none of it had soul. It was a shell, just like him. That's when the awakening began. Slow, painful, like blood returning to a numb limb. He started to remember, not the big events, but the small details his indifference had erased. The smell of the apple pie Chloe baked on weekends, which he barely tasted. The light in her eyes when she shared a book that moved her. A light he extinguished with his silence. The way her hand sought his in the movie theater, a gesture he ignored, too consumed by his own thoughts. He realized, with crushing clarity, that love wasn't an equation to solve or a project to complete. It was a delicate plant Chloe had tried to grow in the desert of his heart, and he, with his neglect, had let it wither. The woman who truly loved him wasn't Emily, the idealized memory of the past. It was Chloe, and he hadn't just lost her, he had destroyed her, crushed her with his coldness, and forced her to commit an act that now haunted his dreams. The guilt finally had a name and a face. Desperate for answers, for any scrap of information to ease the torment in his soul, he went to Chloe's mother's house. She was a dignified woman with the same expressive eyes as her daughter, now looking at him with granite hardness. "What do you want here, Samuel?" she asked, not inviting him in. "I need to know where she is. I need to talk to her," he pleaded, his facade of control finally crumbling. Chloe's mother studied him, her gaze not hateful but filled with deep contempt. Talk about what? That you never loved her. You already said that she should get rid of your child. You said that too. There's nothing left to say. I regret it. I didn't know what I was doing, he stammered, his voice choked with an emotion he barely recognized. No, Samuel, you knew exactly what you were doing. You always do, she shot back, her voice sharp. You destroyed my daughter, made her go through something no woman should, and now you come here, tormented by your convenience, because your perfect life isn't so perfect anymore. The answer is no. I don't know where she is. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Leave her alone, it's the least you can do after everything. She closed the door in his face. The sound of the lock was like a final sentence. Samuel stood on the sidewalk, the man who had the world at his feet, utterly lost. He had destroyed everything, and now the only person who could offer him absolution, who could silence the ghosts in his mind, had vanished. The fault was entirely his. Time in Ellensburg passed. The 8th month of pregnancy arrived, bringing a fullness Chloe never imagined possible. Her belly was a world, a round, pulsing promise of life. The small town had embraced her, and her past secret was safe, guarded by her grandmother's discretion and Hannah's loyalty. But necessity spoke louder than her desire for seclusion. The baby's layette was incomplete, and the town's modest stores didn't have everything she dreamed of for her child. With a sigh, a mix of apprehension and need, she decided she had to return to Seattle just for a day. The trip was planned with military precision. She chose a Wednesday, a typical weekday, hoping the streets would be quieter. She borrowed Hannah's car, avoiding the bus that had carried her away months before. She left at dawn, her heart tight, feeling like she was returning to a crime scene. Seattle, once her home, now felt like hostile territory, every corner a potential ambush of painful memories. She parked far from downtown, in a quiet residential street, and walked toward the commercial area, head down, her body instinctively curling to protect her prominent belly. The noise, the traffic, the rush of people, it all assaulted her after months of rural peace. She felt like a stranger, an outsider in her former world. She hurried into a large department store focused on her list: onesies, blankets, a portable crib. She wanted to finish quickly and return to her sanctuary. While examining a tiny cotton onesie, she felt a momentary peace. She imagined her baby in it, the scent, the warmth. A smile bloomed on her lips. It was in that exact moment of distraction and tenderness that fate moved its pieces. Samuel, meanwhile, was no longer the same man. The month since the door slammed in his face by Chloe's mother had been a purgatory. He abandoned his work fortress, delegating responsibilities to his partner's astonishment. He wandered Seattle aimlessly, a ghost haunting his own life. He looked for her in every face in the crowd, a futile, masochistic exercise. The nightmares didn't stop, they only changed. Now, he dreamed of a baby's cry he couldn't find, a sound that pierced him and left him in deep anguish upon waking. That Wednesday he was walking downtown without direction, fleeing the silence of his apartment. The sun beat on his shoulders, but he felt an inner cold nothing could warm. Then he saw her. Across the street, through a store window. At first it was just a glimpse, a woman with familiar hair, but then she turned in profile, and Samuel's world stopped. It wasn't an illusion. It was Chloe, and she was pregnant. Not just pregnant, but heavily pregnant. Her belly was large, unmistakable. The truth hit him like a runaway train, stealing his breath, weakening his legs. She hadn't had an abortion. The clinic, the hurried exit, the coldness in her voice, it was all a brilliant, desperate lie to protect their child, the child he had rejected. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, his heart pounding wildly. A wave of conflicting emotions flooded him. First, shock, then a fleeting anger at the deception, quickly swallowed by an overwhelming relief. A relief so deep, so absolute, that his knees nearly buckled. The baby was alive. The cry in his dreams wasn't a ghost, it was a premonition. The weight he carried, the guilt that suffocated him nightly, suddenly lifted, as if a window had opened in a dark, stifling room. He watched her, mesmerized. He saw the tender smile on her face as she looked at the tiny clothing in her hands. He saw how she placed a hand on her belly, a gesture of protection and love. And he saw with painful clarity all he had lost, all he had scorned. That woman carrying his child was a universe of love and strength he had been too blind to see. Chloe, feeling an inexplicable shiver, looked up and met his gaze through the glass. Her smile froze. The onesie fell from her hands. Time stopped. To her, it was like seeing a ghost. Panic gripped her, cold and paralyzing. Her eyes widened, and her first instinct was to flee. She turned, abandoning her shopping cart, and hurried toward the store's exit, her heart pounding with panic. Samuel, snapping out of his stupor, reacted. "Chloe!" he shouted, starting across the street, dodging honking cars. She didn't look back. Adrenaline propelled her. All she could think of was reaching the car, returning to the safety of her refuge. He caught up to her at the corner, gently grabbing her arm. "Chloe, please wait." She spun to face him, her face a mask of fear and anger. "Let go of me," she said, her voice trembling. "Stay away from me." "You didn't do it," he whispered, his eyes fixed on her belly, his voice choked. "He's there. Our son." The word "our" was like a slap. "There is no our," she spat, the pain of months surging forth. "He's mine. You made that clear. You didn't want to be a father, so don't be." She pulled free from his grip and walked, almost running, her belly's weight slowing her. Samuel followed, keeping a respectful distance, desperation etched on his face. "Chloe, listen to me, please. I know I have no right to ask anything. I was a monster, blind. I'm sorry. That word doesn't even begin to cover what I feel." She didn't stop walking. Tears streamed down her face, tears of anger, fear, and all the loneliness she had endured. He had seen her. Her hideout was breached. The peace she had built so painstakingly was in ruins. He kept talking, his voice hoarse with emotion, following her through the streets. "I had nightmares every night. I thought you... The guilt was killing me. Seeing you now, seeing our son is okay. Chloe, it's like I can breathe again." She finally stopped, turning to him exhausted. "You can breathe again. Good for you, Samuel. And what about me? Do you have any idea what I went through? Alone. Afraid. You told me to take care of it. And I did. I built a life for me and my son. A life where you don't exist. Go back to yours." She turned and continued, leaving him standing in the middle of the sidewalk. Samuel watched her go, the strong, defiant figure carrying his child. The encounter wasn't what he might have imagined. It was painful, raw, real. But something fundamental had changed. The weight of his nightmares was gone, replaced by a new burden, a new mission. He didn't just want forgiveness. He wanted a chance. He needed to find a way back, not to the life they had, but to the family he had nearly destroyed before it could be born. And he knew it wouldn't be easy. It would be the hardest construction of his life. Samuel didn't follow her to the car. He watched her disappear into the distance, her strong, pregnant silhouette etched in his mind. The anger and fear in her eyes mirrored his own failures. He knew pursuing her then would only push her further away. He returned to his apartment, but the silence that once tormented him was now filled with purpose. The image of his son, alive and safe in the womb of the woman he had hurt, was a flame keeping him from sinking into self-pity. He didn't deserve forgiveness, he knew that, but his son deserved a father, and he was determined to become a man worthy of that child. His first step was an act of humility. He returned to Chloe's mother's house, but this time there was no desperation in his eyes, only a calm, somber resolve. When the woman answered, ready to dismiss him again, he raised a hand. "Please, don't close the door. Hear me out," he began, his voice steady but low. "I saw her. I know she's okay, and the baby is too. And I know everything you think of me is true. I was selfish, cruel, blind." He paused, swallowing the pride that had defined him. "I quit my job. Sold my share of the company. I'm liquidating everything, because I realized I built my entire life on the wrong foundations. I'm not asking you to forgive or trust me. I'm begging for a chance to show, not with words but with actions, that I've changed. I need to be near my son." Chloe's mother studied him, her face impassive, but her eyes scrutinizing every nuance. She saw the absence of his former arrogance, replaced by a deep weariness and raw sincerity. She saw a broken man, but not defeated. A man who perhaps was finally waking up. "And what do you expect me to do?" she asked, her voice still hard. "Just give me the address," he pleaded. "I won't show up demanding rights. I'll come as a pilgrim. If she sends me away, I'll go. But I have to try. For my son." There was a long silence. Chloe's mother thought of her daughter's loneliness, the courage she had shown. She thought of the grandchild about to be born, a child who, despite everything, carried that man's blood. Perhaps every child deserved a chance to know their father, especially one who seemed genuinely remorseful. With a heavy sigh, she went inside, returned with a scrap of paper and handed it to him. "Don't make her regret this, Samuel. It's your last chance." With the address in hand, a town name and a vague reference, Margaret's house near the old oak tree, Samuel drove for hours, leaving behind the life he knew. Each mile was a step away from the man he had been. He didn't take his luxury car, but a simple vehicle bought for the trip. He carried no luggage, just a small bag with essentials. He wasn't going as a successful engineer, but as a man seeking redemption. He found the small town and, following directions, arrived at the whitewashed house with a fern-lined porch. His heart pounded. He saw Chloe sitting on a swing, reading a book, her prominent belly resting in her lap. The scene was so peaceful, so complete, that he felt like an intruder, a discordant note about to disrupt that harmony. Chloe sensed his presence before seeing him. She looked up, and the air left her lungs. The initial fear was quickly replaced by cold fury. How dare he? How had he found her sanctuary? She stood, her body tense, her hand protectively over her belly. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Samuel walked slowly to the edge of the porch, stopping at a respectful distance. "Your mother gave me the address." "My mother?" The betrayal in her voice was palpable. "I begged her, Chloe. I told her I gave up everything, that I needed to try." He stopped, searching for the right words. "I didn't come to demand anything. I didn't come to disturb your peace. I can't stay away, not now that I know." Chloe laughed, a bitter, joyless sound. "Now that you know? And what's changed, Samuel?" "Oh, I know. Your ex-girlfriend's getting married. You ran out of options and remembered you had a problem that might be useful. Is that it?" The accusation was venom, distilled from months of pain and humiliation. Her words hit him, but he didn't flinch. He deserved them. "Yes, I went to see Emily. And yes, she's getting married," he admitted with brutal honesty. "And the rejection I got from her was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it made me realize I was looking for happiness in the wrong place. It made me see you, and our son. I didn't understand their value until I thought I'd lost them forever. I know it's late. I know I'm the last person you want to see. But I'm here, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to stay. Not in your house, not in your life, but nearby. There's a small room out back, an old lady told me. I can live there, I can help with whatever you need. I just want my son, when he's born, to know his father wasn't a coward. At least, not forever." Margaret, watching from the kitchen doorway, approached. She looked at her granddaughter, then at the man standing in her garden. There was a truth in his desperation that was hard to ignore. Chloe was stunned, conflicted. The hurt and distrust battled the sincerity she saw in his eyes. The accusation about Emily had been a test, and he had passed, admitting his stupidity without hesitation. The idea of having him nearby was terrifying, yet a part of her, the part thinking of her son's future, wondered if it wasn't the right thing to do. "I don't trust you, Samuel," she said finally. "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for your permission to try to earn it, from scratch." She looked at her grandmother, who gave a slight nod, a silent vote of confidence. Chloe sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion and uncertainty. "Fine, you can stay in the back room, but understand this. You're here as my son's father. Nothing more. Don't expect anything from me." "It's more than I deserve," he said, the relief in his voice so palpable it nearly made him sway. "Thank you, Chloe." And so, Samuel settled into the small tool shed at the back of the property. A simple room with a bed, a chair, and a small window. For the man who had lived in a luxury penthouse, it was a stark contrast. But from that window, he could see the house where his son and the woman he was learning to love again lived. It was a start. A humble, painful, uncertain start. The beginning of repair. Samuel's presence on the property was like a discordant note in a familiar melody. In the first days, Chloe treated him with polite coldness, an invisible barrier he didn't dare cross. They communicated in monosyllables, exchanging only essential information. She watched him from afar, her critical gaze waiting for the first misstep, the first proof his change was a farce. But Samuel seemed determined to dismantle the man he had been, brick by brick. He didn't try to force conversations or intrude on her routine. Instead, he focused on being useful, speaking the language of actions, the only one that might reach Chloe's wounded heart. The engineer who designed skyscrapers now fixed the chicken coop's fence. The man who dined in Seattle's finest restaurants learned from Margaret to cook simple dishes, leaving a pot of soup or fresh bread at the kitchen door without expecting thanks. He woke before dawn to weed the garden, fix loose shingles, paint what needed painting. He did it all with quiet focus, as if each task was a form of penance. Chloe saw it all. She saw the sweat on his brow, the hands once used only for signing contracts now calloused and dirty. And it confused her. The hurt was still there, a live ember in her chest. But it was hard to maintain hostility in the face of such tireless, humble dedication. She allowed him to join her for prenatal visits, more at Margaret's insistence than her own desire. On those drives they shared a tense silence. But in the doctor's office, she saw the awe in his eyes as he heard the baby's heartbeat, the attention he paid to the doctor's instructions. He wasn't acting. That interest, that emotion, was genuine. One night, exhausted and with aching back, Chloe was on the porch trying to find a comfortable position. Samuel, watching from a distance, approached hesitantly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to a kettle in his hand. "Margaret taught me a tea that helps you relax." She wanted to refuse to keep the distance, but exhaustion won over pride. She nodded. He poured the tea into a mug and set it on the table beside her, saying nothing more, and retreated to the darkness of his small room. Chloe sipped the tea, and its warmth seemed to heat something beyond her body. It was the first direct gesture of care, and she didn't know how to react. Their coexistence slowly found a rhythm. Chloe remained distant, but the initial hostility gave way to resigned acceptance. She allowed him to be a father, to participate, but kept the man locked outside her heart. She saw him talk to her belly when he thought she was asleep on the swing, his voice low and full of a tenderness she had never received. Those moments disarmed her, opening small cracks in her protective wall. The day came without warning, as most great events do. It was a warm spring morning, and Chloe was at the rural school, teaching a lesson on types of narrators. She felt more tired than usual, a constant pressure in her lower back. She attributed it to her belly's weight, the heat. Suddenly, a sharp pain stopped her mid-sentence. She gripped the desk, breathing deeply. The students looked at her, worried. Another contraction, stronger, undeniable. Time, once dragging, now raced. The baby was coming. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She was far from home, far from the hospital. The school principal, an efficient woman, came to her aid. "Who can we call, dear? Your emergency contact." Chloe hesitated for a second. Her grandmother didn't drive. Hannah was at a market in another town. The name that left her lips was almost a whisper, a surrender. "Samuel." She gave the number, and the principal made the call. On the other end, Samuel, fixing a water pump, heard the news, and his world stopped. "She's in labor." He didn't think. He dropped his tools and ran to the car, his heart a mix of panic and euphoria. He drove like a madman, kicking up dust on the dirt road, reaching the school in record time. When he entered the small room where they had placed her, he found her pale, breathing heavily. Her gaze was one of fear, vulnerability. All the armor she had built around herself had fallen. In that moment, she wasn't the strong, wary woman. She was a mother about to give birth, and she was scared. He approached, and for the first time in months took her hand. "I'm here, Chloe, I'm here, you're not alone." The drive to the hospital was a blur of contractions and encouragement. Samuel drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers, his voice calm, telling her to breathe, that she was strong, that everything would be okay. He didn't leave her side for a second. He handled the admission, answered the nurse's questions, and when they took her to the delivery room, he was there, in a blue gown, holding her hand with a strength that was both her anchor and her harbor. During the long hours that followed, he was her rock. He wiped the sweat from her brow, whispered encouragement, breathed with her through each contraction. He saw her pain, her superhuman strength, and felt both the smallest of men and the most privileged. He was witnessing a miracle, one he had nearly thrown away. At the peak of her pain, when Chloe screamed she couldn't do it, he pressed his forehead to hers and said, "You can. You're the strongest woman I know. Bring our son into the world, my love." The word love, spoken amid the chaos, went almost unnoticed but lingered in the air, a silent promise. And then, with her final effort, came the sound. A strong, vibrant cry that filled the room and their hearts. The baby was born. A boy. Perfect. The newborn's cry was the only thing in the universe, a primal sound that washed away pain, fear, and the past. The nurse, smiling, placed the tiny bundle in Chloe's arms. She looked at the wrinkled face, the tiny flailing hands, and an overwhelming love, so intense it hurt, filled every fiber of her being. All the lonely nights, all the uncertain days were worth it for this moment. Her son was here, safe, perfect. Samuel watched frozen, tears streaming down his face without him noticing. He had never cried like this, with his soul exposed. It was a cry of gratitude, regret, and a joy so pure it was almost unbearable. Chloe, feeling his gaze, looked up. Amid exhaustion and happiness, she saw the broken and remade man beside her. Without thinking, moved by an instinct deeper than her hurt, she whispered, "Do you want to hold him?" It was the most important question he had ever heard. With trembling hands he approached. The nurse helped him hold the baby. The tiny weight in his arms was the most monumental thing he had ever held. He looked at his son, their son, and saw the miracle of life he had nearly rejected. In that moment, he felt a love that wasn't calculated, designed, or conditional. It simply was. He leaned down and kissed the baby's forehead, a kiss that was a silent vow of eternal devotion. The hospital days that followed were a surreal calm. They moved in a bubble, united by the tiny being who depended entirely on them. Samuel didn't leave Chloe's side. He learned to change diapers with an engineer's focus, to bathe with a gentleness that surprised the nurses, to soothe the baby's cries with infinite patience. He cared for Chloe, ensuring she ate, rested, bringing her water, adjusting her pillows. He asked for nothing in return. His reward was being there, present. Chloe watched him, her heart in a state of confused transition. The wall she had built around herself was in ruins. This man wasn't the one who told her to take care of it. This was a devoted father, a caring partner. The forced coexistence brought by their son's birth was becoming a routine of peace and mutual respect. They talked not about the past but the present, about the baby's quirks, the lack of sleep, the color of little Jacob's eyes. The return home was a new beginning. Margaret and Hannah had prepared everything. The small room transformed into a nest of love. Samuel, unprompted, moved his things from the back room to the living room couch to hear Jacob's cries at night and help. The early hours became a shared territory. While Chloe nursed, Samuel made her tea, sitting quietly in a nearby armchair, his presence a comforting companion in the night stillness. They were building a family, not based on a contract or sweeping passion, but on bricks of daily care, acts of service, and silent respect for each other's space and pain. Chloe's hurt didn't vanish, but it was slowly buried under layers of new memories, memories of a Samuel she had never known. About a month after Jacob's birth, on a quiet afternoon while he slept in his crib, Samuel found Chloe on the porch, gazing at the horizon. He approached, his heart in his throat. "Chloe, can we talk?" She turned, her face serene. "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I know nothing can erase what I did. The pain I caused you will always be a scar in our story, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." He looked at his hands, now calloused. "In Seattle, I built skyscrapers, structures of concrete and steel, but I never knew how to build a home. I've learned more about being a man this past month, changing diapers and making tea, than in my entire life." He met her eyes, the sincerity undeniable. "I love you, Chloe. I think in a warped, blind way I always did, but I was a fool who didn't know the name of what I felt. I'm not asking you to love me back. I don't deserve that yet, but I want to ask you something." He knelt before her, not with a ring, but with an open heart. "I want to marry you, again. Not out of obligation, not because of Jacob, but by choice. My choice. Because my life only started making sense when I realized it was empty without you and our son. I want the chance to do it right this time." Chloe listened, tears streaming silently down her face. They were different tears from before, not of pain or anger, but of release, of a cycle closing. She looked at the man kneeling before her, a man who had shed all his pride for her. She reached out and touched his face. "Stand up, Samuel." He stood, his face tense with anticipation. "The first time," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you came into my life through the back door with a closed heart and for convenience. If there's a next time—" She paused, a small smile blooming on her lips. "This time, you'll have to come through the front door, with your whole heart, flowers in hand, and Margaret's blessing." The relief on Samuel's face was so immense he nearly collapsed. He embraced her, a hug not of possession, but of gratitude, reverence, a hug that promised a future. From the kitchen window, Margaret smiled silently, wiping a tear with the corner of her apron. She knew that true love, when real, finds winding paths to heal. It doesn't return the same. It doesn't return pristine. It returns stronger, wiser, forged in the fire of regret and forgiveness. Their ending wasn't a fairy tale. It was something far better. It was real. It was a restart built not on empty promises, but on constant presence, daily dedication, and the patience of someone rebuilding a house on foundations that were once ruins. It was a home raised again, not with words, but with the sound of a baby's laughter, the smell of fresh coffee, and the comfortable silence of two hearts that at last learned to beat in rhythm. Wow, what a story. Tell us what you thought. Leave your opinion in the comments with a rating from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to follow all our stories. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.